Hey guys, Luton here, and today we're going to be talking about Overwatch, which so far for me has been a huge success. We'll get into the whys and wherefores of that, but first let's talk about what Overwatch is for those of you who don't know or haven't seen about it. Overwatch is a 6v6 character-based battle arena game. You choose from one of 21 heroes to form your team of 6, then face off to win modes across 12 maps. One excellent feature is that all the characters are unlocked by default and all their abilities are also fully unlocked. This means there's no tactical level up, there's no advantage or best anything. As soon as you pick up the game, you have access to all of the abilities, everything in the game. The only upgrades to achieve are cosmetic, which you can unlock through loot boxes you win from the matches, or which can also be purchased if you wish as a microtransaction. Just to highlight again though, this is only for cosmetic items. In the game modes, you will either fight to capture or defend a point on the map, capture and then escort a package through to an end zone with checkpoints along the way, or you'll simply battle for control of the same point on the map as the enemy team. You can't select which of these you actually play because it throws you into a rotating selection of these game modes. Now this could be viewed as a negative, but because of how the game plays, it works just fine. And in many ways, because of the high focus in Overwatch on team play, it means that they are actually all the more enjoyable. Also, they actively chose not to include a team deathmatch style mode, as they didn't want people to focus on kills, rather they wanted to highlight people to focus on team play. In addition to that, kills will not feature on the final scoreboard unless you gain enough to be highlighted in the end of round cards, but this may or may not feature, it depends on how well you do. In short, Overwatch's focus is completely on team play, unlike say Star Wars Battlefront, which actually had a fairly comparable setup in terms of how people joined in on mode rotations and its end of round cards, but unlike Star Wars Battlefront, it keeps the focus purely on whether or not you win or lose as a team, and not just who scored the most kills overall. I can't help but feel, even now, if Star Wars Battlefront had decided to take a similar approach as Overwatch has done with their game, it would have been immeasurably more enjoyable and kept people's attention for much longer to get that kind of feel of, you know, we're all fighting for the same focus. Whereas I felt many times in Star Wars Battlefront, it really was that people were just chasing the heroes, chasing the big vehicle pickups so that they could rack those kills and get themselves on the end of the scoreboard. And to me, I think that really kind of deteriorated people's focus on the game. Now, much has been said about Overwatch's art style, whether it be the Pixar-esque look or the design of some of the female characters. It's important to put this aside. As I have said many times about games before, of course visuals are always going to be important. Of course, they're right there in front of you, but they are never the most important feature. If this had, if Overwatch had a gritty, realistic veneer of, say, Tier 1 military operations, people would certainly view it differently, even when it's what's underneath that counts. It's wrong to dismiss a game on aesthetics alone. Just as it's also wrong to overtly celebrate a game's graphics when it's the core infrastructure that lets you down, e.g. The Division. For me, when viewing a new game, you need to strip away the graphics. Imagine you are looking at a game in the same way we saw that level design in the Battlefield CTE, plain poly backgrounds. If you can imagine that, and then focus on the mechanics of the game, if that element is strong enough to keep you coming back, you know that this is something that will hold your attention for a long time to come, and that there's definitely something about it that's worthwhile. Now, many people have been giving Overwatch, in my opinion, an unfairly cold reception, either because they dislike the look and feel, or because they think that it's not original enough. The obvious comparison, which is already starting to feel exhaustively tired because I've seen it said so many times in comments and social media, is the comparison to Team Fortress. And yes, it has some elements there, it shares a principle. But think about this for a moment. Isn't it completely crazy that a game has to be perceived as distinctly unique and new simply to be given a chance now? In an age of sequels and repetition, I think that's honestly just lazy reactionism rather than real critique. Not to mention the fact that Blizzard is a company well known for taking a base concept and then pushing it through to a polished release, and my god, people should be thankful and happy for that. Yes, seeing new things is great, of course, we always want to try and see new things, but I would wager that many people still haven't experienced as rich a spectrum of games that are out there on offer, despite it being easier than ever to access them. So if a game shares some semblance of others in the genre but brings an incredibly high quality experience to the table, well, I'm sorry not sorry to say you can put me in the camp of, if you don't want to give it a chance, then just move along, because this game is going to shift a ton of copies and in my opinion be a solid title for years to come. Some criticism has also been directed at the fact that other games offering a similar experience are free to play, but as we know, most free to play games try to direct you to other forms of payment, whether it's, sort of upgrades in the game or aesthetics, or even sometimes that, kind of like a skill gap where you have to upgrade things in order to breach that and sort of, be on a level playing field with other people. If anything, we should be appreciative that Blizzard decided to sell Overwatch as a full game with all the characters available. I know that seems crazy in a way, but hey, in 2016 I welcome it. That leads us to the price point though, and again, some people feel that for the base game, £30 or US $40 is too expensive for the content provided, and that's for the base game. Well, I'm not going to repeat myself yet again, but for those of you who regularly watch me, you know that my opinion on this is that, if something is too expensive, well, that price is subjective. What is expensive to me may not be to you, and it's not just a case of how much disposable income you have either. It also comes down to simply how much you want that experience. That's going to shift the goalpost for you in terms of how much you are willing to pay for an item. And ultimately, it just comes down to, do you feel it's worth the value to you? And that's all there is to it. Now personally, I always try to buy the best quality products that I can. So yeah, if there was a similar-ish experience available for less, would I be tempted? Of course, but if I was offered that same experience for a little bit more, knowing that I would get a higher quality experience, I would go for it every time, and Overwatch for me falls into that category. It's worth spending out because of the quality of experience you get from it, not to mention the amount of time you're going to put into the game. We all know games versus other media give us far more entertainment for the money versus pretty much everything else. So let me tell you why I consider Overwatch such a great title right from release. Well, mainly because we got to see pretty much the full game in the beta and closed beta. They've made really minimal changes to balance of characters because they are very fair, and to anyone who says they are not, or that one character is currently OP, I say go figure out a counter. They all have counters. And also, I think often a lot of the criticism about OP-ness and stuff tends to come from people that are playing solo, and I have to say, I think often that's some streamers and YouTubers, because a lot of streamers and YouTubers, they tend to play games solo. Why? Because it's difficult to hook up with people. You've got to coordinate your times, you've got to coordinate your schedules, and that's not conducive to the way in which most YouTubers and streamers live their lives. They like to be able to make the content when they want to make it at any time, and if you have to get together 3 or 4 or 5 people in order to get some games together, that's not so easy. And so I think often this kind of direction of criticism about OP-ness, which as I say I've been looking around the last sort of 24-48 hours and seeing it out there, I think a lot of the time it simply comes back to the fact that you really need to team up, you need to buddy up, you need to co-op in order to get those counters against some of these characters which can seem very powerful individually, but once you get some teamwork going on and you figure out a counter to that, that's how you really solve that problem. So in my opinion, I don't think any character is OP right now. In fact, anybody that we have had an issue with, and Bastion is the one which always comes up, there are many counters. Outrange him, block him, get in there, flank him. There's a million different ways that you can deal with those issues. But also Overwatch's core mechanics and netcode are extremely solid. I have not had a single experience through the closed or open beta, or even since release, that I would attribute to lag or latency. There has been an issue where you can occasionally lose connection to game servers and get kicked back to the menu, but this has been highly rare, and it's only happened to me once. The characters are incredibly diverse in both design and how they play. Each has strengths and weaknesses, as I said, and it's important to understand both so you can maximize their potential, but also so you can appropriately counter and defend against them. It's all that knowledge. The level design creates variety, and you never feel that it inhibits or affects your gameplay. When you consider most of the gameplay is to an extent linear or focused around a single capture point with varying degrees of verticality, essentially whether stationary or moving, your team is generally focused around that one specific target point. This means that instead of the whole level being relevant throughout the round, you'll find overall that specific areas become battlegrounds, choke points, or a challenge to overcome. They're not just a miserable slaughter. And knowing when to set up a solid defense, fall back, or push an attack, that all becomes critical. The positioning of objectives in the level is what passively forces team play, because generally everyone is fighting near or around 1 point. This is why it can sometimes seem like organized chaos to the uninitiated. It's also why running off solo to chase targets is not only a handicap to your team, but generally a waste of your time unless you're playing a fast class like Tracer. The only time you want to do this if you're hunting a problem character who's staying far back from the team, and again that can be like Bastion, Widowmaker. If you can flank back, destroy them and then come back to your team, that's worthwhile spending the time to do that. Another great aspect is the matchmaking. You all know how frustrating the balance for games can be in something like Battlefield, and this seems largely down to those privately hosted servers. Now that's not a bad thing, but we could talk about this more another time, but privately hosted servers, they're really kind of like a blessing in disguise. They're great for personal choice and potentially are challenging environments, but on the other hand, they can be frustratingly imbalanced on these servers, and that never seems to change up. But Overwatch so far seems incredibly well balanced. Even the games I've had where we got destroyed, or in which we destroyed the other team, they were not that much of a steamroll. There was still a battle to be had. Best of all, the rounds are so short and intense that even if you do get a bad round, well, you can just step back, rejoin with a new team to focus and hopefully find one that's slightly more balanced. So it's not a big deal even if you find a team which is just, crushing you one way from another. And sometimes you need to, you can't think of what you need to do to solve that situation in the moment. You sometimes need to step back, step out and think like, okay, what happened there? Discuss it with your guys, come up with a counter, and then the next time around you meet that group or you meet people using that same tactic, then you've got a solution to that problem. So the best thing about Overwatch for me, it goes without saying, is obviously the team focus. It is highly focused on team, and quite honestly, if you do not take the time to group up with friends or join a clan to find people to play Overwatch with, your experience will not reach its true potential. And that is not a negative, alright? I see people saying like, well, it's not so good playing solo, or you feel frustrated, you shouldn't have to spend the time to team up with other people. Unfortunately, no. It's just the case. It's a team-focused game. If you don't want to play a team-focused game, there's a lot of other FPS out there that you can play which are not team-focused. This game is team-focused. It requires you to play with other people to maximize your experience in the game. That's what it is. It's very clear. That's what it brings to the table. If you want that, this is the game for you. So Overwatch is an entirely team-focused game. Everything about it pushes teamwork. Playing solo, though, it must be said, is probably much as you would expect from any multiplayer game in 2016. You may have a good time, you may have a bad time, you may make new friends, some people may undermine your faith in humanity. But looking on the bright side, it's another thing that pushes you towards team play. Having a really crappy multiplayer experience with, some randoms pushes you towards wanting to make that kind of team play association. In fact, it's the very reason why back in COD 4 I ended up joining a clan. I got so frustrated with the inability of public groups of players to work together, I realised that there was no option left for me other than to find like-minded people to connect with. So the gameplay of Overwatch in an initial sense is very simplistic, but once you understand the basics, you realise that this is far more complex. Its cutesy art style combined with this face value simplicity is why I believe some people are dismissing it as not for them. This is flat out a mistake. Overwatch is far more challenging a game than a general impression would lead you to believe, and if you've literally only just touched the game or spent an hour on it or watched videos about it and so on to get your impression, that is not good enough. The game requires discipline from you in choosing characters, not always focused on maximum damage output. It requires knowledge of 21 heroes and all of their abilities, their mechanics and plays people are likely to make as well. Knowledge of your maps and routes and positions, choke points, flanks, how to combo up your characters and when to save or use an ultimate ability. Combine all of this plus requiring tight team communication and awareness and you have a game to test even the most proficient FPS players. And if that's not enough, the cherry on the cake is the speed of the game. It is fast. You often barely have seconds to play with in your decision making, and as much as other games have sped up recently, they really just don't compare to the way that Overwatch plays. Changing a hero or knowing when to use your ultimate skill is the difference between success or failure, and these are choices made in very short time windows. Get it wrong, you may cost your team the game. This high pressure is what gives Overwatch that addictive edge. It's what sucks you back in, even as a seasoned FPS player, and makes you want to push yourself more and more every game, and makes you want to spend time refining and training your squad until you're rinsing matches like a well-oiled machine. Now at this point it seems right to say that despite all my talk of intensity and teamwork, Overwatch is also an incredibly accessible game, and accessibility doesn't have to mean dumbing it down either. It means just making a game an entry point, a gateway to the higher level beyond. We all had to start somewhere when we were playing games, right? The way they have brought the characters together in this game means that there is always something to learn. As a new player, you'll want to focus on just understanding the different abilities and how to handle the characters. But as you progress, you'll learn positions, refine playstyles, small details which can make a big difference. It's true across the board, whether you're playing a DPS, a tank, a support, and there is as much to learn about being a healer or a defense character as there is with your damage dealers. One of the most addictive things about the game is wanting to challenge yourself and just improve and improve on your own skills. To that end, being critical about yourself is highly important, as it is in any game, but especially in a game like Overwatch. I've already been encouraging my squad to be critical of themselves and each other, because identifying what you do wrong in a round is more important by far than just giving each other praise when you get a solid win. The matchmaking means you always face a challenge, so there's no slacking off. You have to bring your A game to every single round, and that pressure is highly addictive. Let's talk a little bit about characters. Obviously 21, I could go into loads of detail about every single one of them in terms of plays, the way in which you can counter, all this kind of stuff. But let's just go into it a little bit. Now, this game has captured my imagination and my attention. It doesn't matter to me if I'm playing a lightning fast DPS like Tracer, a mid-range assault like Soldier 76, laying defense with Mei, tanking with Reyna or Zarya, or bringing support with Lucio or Mercy. Every character has something to learn, and some characters which seem the most passive can actually be the most challenging. Mercy is a great example. She has immense team support power with her concentrated healing and damage boost, plus her ultimate, which can resurrect any disabled team member in an instant. She can even resurrect a full team, which allows for some incredibly powerful plays. Yet she has only a tiny pistol to defend herself and is so incredibly vulnerable and relies on nearly completely her team to protect her. Tracer, on the other hand, is likely to be blinking around, harassing and locating enemy campers and eliminating them. She's often isolated away from the team, and her blink ability enables her to avoid and escape damage. Playing Tracer, your knowledge of health pack positions around the map is critical, so you can retreat, heal yourself and then re-engage without needing your team's support at all. This diversity of play continues throughout all the characters, some requiring more help from their team than others, but all providing a critical role for the team. If you are not playing your role correctly, you are undermining your team, and this will likely expose a weakness which your enemy will identify and exploit. Now, as much as a damage dealer's, a DPS role is to just run around and get those kills and generally harass the enemy, Overwatch is not the kind of FPS where people are always going to be just running around going for kills, because as I say, there's other characters, there's other roles in there. And for one thing, if you try and focus on just kills, like if you're taking, if that's your sole task and you run around and you basically split yourself off from your team and you're not playing a character like Tracer, you're going to probably be unsuccessful, because if the other team have even some basic teamwork happening, they're just going to out-heal your attacks, disable and destroy you. Now again, that's very situational, but overall what I'm saying is, you need to kind of be aware of your team. That's really what I'm trying to say. You need to be aware of your team, where they are, think about the relation in order to that, so you don't get completely cut off and then just annihilated. And the reason I say this is because I cannot count the amount of teams that I've seen in the past week where they take too many damage dealers, thinking that they're the business, and then they're just going to end up losing severely because we have a good tank, a good healer, excellent defense. Now, not every tactic for the game relies on just out-damaging and killing your enemy team. An equally valid tactic is to just be defensive and outlast them. Taking a character like Mei is highly suited to this, with her ice wall abilities that focus on slowing, freezing and blocking makes her an excellent asset for a defensive tactic. Now let's talk about pace and timing. Now many people seem surprised that I'm so interested in Overwatch because of its fast pace and often chaotic encounters, because I play a lot of games that are quite slow. I attribute it to my love of that slower tactical play like Armor, or my well-known focus for Teamplay in Battlefield. But make no mistake, I love fast games. I was a huge player of Super Smash Bros. I would always take a character like Fox to maximize my speed, so no surprise that Tracer is my favourite character in Overwatch. Also, she's British. The pace and chaos in some situations, as I said before, seems to me one of the reasons why people again have seemed a bit cold on Overwatch, but it shouldn't be. Although on screen it can seem often like, as I say, total anarchy, It's not, it's just that everybody's highly focused on their role and everything is happening in a concentrated space. And I also think it's why people have struggled to engage a bit with it on things like Twitch sometimes and also on YouTube, because they just see all that chaos happening and they don't really understand what's happening and it all just looks a bit flashy. So you actually do, I think it's one of these games where you do actually need a little bit of background knowledge, or you at least need the person who's presenting that content to explain kind of what is happening. Otherwise it's a bit confusing, you might really not know what's going on. It doesn't help matters that the game all happens in quite a concentrated space, so it tends to be like that a lot of the time. Many games come down to critical timed events like combining ultimates to make a final push, or swapping a hero mid-game to either adapt to the latest section of a level or counter an opposing team composition that you didn't expect. Overwatch for me, it's an absolutely fantastic game. It originally took me a little while to warm to it, but I can see now it's a game that I am unlikely to tire of quickly. Again, it's too easy to imagine that with 12 levels and only 3 modes, which in many respects are very similar, that the game would become quickly repetitive. That's an obvious conclusion to make, and I can tell you that is not the case. Why? It's easily answered: the players. Because of the quality matchmaking that throws you against players of a similar skill bracket, you are constantly challenged, which holds your interest without demoralizing you. Nothing kills a game faster than imbalance and maybe hacking. Overwatch is gladly free from both of these. And the game is not just largely free from issues though, it's about the enjoyment that you feel playing. It's one of those things which is really hard to describe, which is why if you didn't get on the open beta, you missed an opportunity. The gameplay in all aspects, it really is a joy, and that goes across all the heroes, whether they're offensive or support and defense. I find myself wanting to get onto this game every day, and I haven't had that feeling for a while. I got that feeling initially with The Division, but it wore out quickly because of the repetitiveness. And again, as I say, this isn't just release day enjoyment for me, because I played it in the closed beta for quite some time, I played it in the open beta, and I'm back on with the release, and even though, you had full access to all of the characters in all that time, I still feel as fresh and excited about the game as I did from the very first time I sort of started getting into it. Overwatch does provide something for everyone without compromising the experience for hardcore or casual players alike. If you are not a strong FPS player with your aim, it doesn't matter, there are other options for you to play. If you enjoy tactics and strategy, you can bring that in. If you want solid teamwork and a chance to co-op with others, this game has got that in spades. We can't know how truly successful Overwatch is going to be in the next 6 months. I think there is a general cynicism around lately that every new game that comes out will just peak at release and then die quickly as people jump from one hype train to another. I think the fact that we've had a string of games which have promised so much and then really failed to deliver does not help at all there. I think though that this in and of itself is a very unhealthy attitude towards games. They shouldn't be something to just go crazy over and then drop as soon as the next thing comes along. And I actually question whether YouTube is partly responsible for that. I say partly responsible because, YouTubers, the way that they tend to generate a lot of content, and, I suppose I'm partly to blame in this category as well, is that, but I think, some people are worse at this than others, is that they generate tons and tons of hype around a game release because that generates views for their YouTube channels, and then it always peters off a little bit, but they want to keep that up, and the best way to keep that up is to move on to the next thing, right? And so it just kind of goes up and up and up, so you don't tend to get that situation where a game comes along and then a person supports it all the way through, because the true enjoyment is in games that you can play for the long term. Does Overwatch have that potential? I truly believe it does. Blizzard has a solid track record of not only delivering quality products, but games that stand the test of time, unlike so many things that we see now. And I say that as a WoW player, a veteran WoW player from back in the day, of a committed 5+ years of extremely hardcore gaming. So it seems more than a little coincidental that the theme of Overwatch in its character backstory is one of hope and aspiration. Perhaps Overwatch will give hope to so many of us who want a game to invest time in that does not just die after the release hype has faded. This is Luton.